Hi, welcome to Job Ready. My name's Jeff Nelder, and I'm joined today by Dr. Mara Woody, who is the Director of Strategic Partnerships at Riipen. Welcome, Mara.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So glad that you're here as well. You have so many interesting things going on. I've been looking forward to talking with you, but the place I want to start is, and maybe it's too obvious, but we called this podcast Job Ready, and we thought about it from a very a human empowerment standpoint. We felt like, the economic mobility, the sense of usefulness that comes from having a job was, like way up there. And I know you've said, hey, job readiness is just a ceiling rather than a destination. And just because I'm curious and I'm very open to whatever helps people make the case for why that is. And then let's talk about how you look at things.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds great. So I believe, Jeff, a lot of this conversation came about because of how I frame really job readiness more under that cushion of world readiness. And so for me, we all know the classic debate, higher education is not job training. And we all know that that's a very real conversation that we hear. And even to the point that it's not my job to train individuals for a job. We all know those debates. And so the way that I really look at this and I really frame this is world readiness. The skills that I develop to solve problems at home are probably the same skills that I'm going to use to solve problems in the workplace, to solve problems in my community. Communication, I don't say, oh, I only communicate at work. When I get home, I don't communicate anymore. And so these skills really are life skills. They're world readiness skills that I use no matter the context. And I think we forget that. Human beings tend to be dichotomous thinkers. And so we tend to not think of that, okay, while you might be applying problem solving, critical thinking in a job scenario today, truly the best way to think about that is how does this transcend every area of my life? How would I be using this outside the workplace? Or even better, is what I'm doing in my work somehow correlating to what I'm doing in my personal life? One great example is, let's say that I'm working at I'm at an institution, I'm working with a childcare provider on how to expand childcare access in my community. I'm solving a problem in my community. I'm working with an employer, so I'm applying skills in the workplace, but maybe I'm also a parent who's struggling to find childcare. So now I'm dipping into all areas of my life with those skills. And so really to start thinking about it that way, which is what education can uniquely do, is combine all these different facets of our lives for us to really figure out how I'm not a critical thinker at work and a problem solver at home. I'm a critical thinker. I'm a problem solver in every area of my life.
That's so interesting and so powerful as an idea. I know one of the things that inspired me, Mara, way back when, is I saw a report from it might have been the FTC, but it was a report that was talking about a big gap in workforce development. And essentially, the report said, "Hey, look, you've got economic development on one side, you've got workforce development on the other side, but there's really nobody creating connective tissue in the middle, right?" And what I think is really interesting and resonant for me about what you said just now is, like that mindset. There's the economic development and the workforce development. That really feels like it's outside of the individual, right? There are other people doing things to and for the individual rather than the individual being ready to create that connective tissue themselves, right? Is that kind of where you're going with that?
It is a little bit. And actually, I learned this very early on. So my master's and bachelor's degrees are both in criminal justice. And I work in education. And people are like, why would you even? And one time I was doing some auditing of some files and somebody was like, well, Mara, you don't have the background to be an auditor. I'm like, what do you mean? My criminal justice background taught me to trust nothing, be suspicious of everything, and leave no detail unturned. And so those are great auditor skills, have nothing to do with a financial background, but those are skills that carry through no matter what. And so as an individual, I made that connection. I knew that. I made that connection on my own. But what I hear more and more is that learners don't necessarily make those connections. And so that's also part of our responsibility, is to help make sure that we communicate to individuals what their skills mean across their entire lifespan. Give them opportunities to reflect on that, learn on that, communicate that, and then be able to discuss and talk about that with others. I think that's really what we miss, is how are we empowering individuals to know that is part of their story and they are developing those, and to help them think through what does that connective tissue look like.
Yeah. Well, and another thing that I've heard you say that's really compelling about this is rather than these world readiness skills, rather than simply being ready in a reactive way for what the world throws at you, this orientation helps you get ready to create the type of world that you want, or I guess contribute to that. That seems like a really tall order. I talk with university folks, I talk with uh, training folks. Everybody's working really hard to try and show people the way, teach them this skill, that skill. Now, that meta skill of creating the world that you want sounds like a tall order for any system. Is the system ready to do that? How do you do that?
Well, I would say that to some degree, the system is doing it because we now live in a world with AI. And while everyone's afraid of AI, I keep saying, in education, we should actually be saying you're welcome, because we helped create that new knowledge that created that. But in that, in creating new knowledge, that isn't something that you can necessarily control or know or predict in advance. You have to accept the ambiguity that your world is going to move in ways that you cannot define today. You have to be okay with that, and you have to lean into being okay with that. I heard several years ago that the number one skill to being a good leader is the ability to thrive in ambiguity. And so it's hard to define and it's squishy, but it's that ability to be able to, I see a world of chaos. I find a goal beyond that chaos and I find the path to reach that goal. And just really helping individuals develop and learn that, I can do that. It doesn't have to be structured. It doesn't have to be constrained. It doesn't have to be a linear progression. It has to be, no matter what it is, I'm looking forward to what's ahead of that chaos and I'm working toward that. It's playing the long game, really, if you're going to kind of think about a sports analogy.
Yeah. Well, so, okay, there's the long game, there's the game that's in front of us right now. And there's a lot of people who are afraid of being disintermediated by this powerful technology that is AI, right?
Right.
And I'm speaking at kind of a plebeian level saying AI, but let's for a second, we don't need to be technical, right? So um, people are afraid. There are ways to train people, world readiness skills. There's this great technology. How does AI fit into that? Like with the you're welcome orientation, which I kind of agree with, but I want to hear you talking.
Yeah, so it's actually really interesting. Even just in the past couple of weeks, I've started to see, there's the fear. And I liken this to really whenever COVID hit. I was working in a state capacity at the time where there was a lot of fear, a lot of we don't know. How do we stay safe? What's not going to hurt us? There's no information. What people needed in that moment was information and community. And so actually I was in a role where I was able to do that. I was able to build community across the state that I'm from, Missouri, greatest state in the country,
Tell me.
but also that we were able to bring information. I liken AI to a bit of that emotional impact of COVID. People are scared. They don't know if they're relevant. They don't know if they can meet the moment and be able to become that person who embraces AI or knows how to use AI. They don't know where they'll be in 5 years. Are they going to lose their job to AI? And so I see that there's a lot of this fear. What I am starting to see, though, under that fear is what is uniquely human about us is the fact that human beings can't help but continue to look past the chaos. I think it's part we're innately born with that. And then it's the opportunity for us to grow, expand, and make that part of our identity. It's really important. But I'm seeing more and more conversations from folks where we're talking about, we all know IQ, we all know EQ. What I'm starting to see now is RQ. Relational IQ. How do we interact within our community? How do we build a sense of community? How are we as human beings actually working together to accomplish things? And really starting to frame up, that is that next skill that we need in an AI world, is to really, truly, deeply lean into what it means to be human, uniquely human, because then we can define what AI can do and what it can't do. And then just yesterday, day before, I saw another discussion around HQ, which is human IQ, which is, again, leaning even more and more into the human skills, us being the human beings, and relegating AI to, and I'm sorry, I know people will not agree with me, but AI is a tool. It is a technology and it is an advancement like other technology advancements. I'm pretty sure we had similar conversations when the calculator came out, when we all started using the internet, email. Like, these are all technological advancements where people fear their self-preservation due to that technology. When we frame AI as yet another one of those, it reduces a little bit of the scariness. But what we also see is with every single technological advancement, we as human beings always prevail. And so having faith in ourselves a little bit and not fearing that process that gets us to where we're going and really leaning in and not being afraid to say, I'm going to think past this chaos to what do I see at the other end?
So interesting. I'm recalling around 2007, 2008 when the first iPhone came out. And I remember having the flip phone, which I thought was great because I grew up on Star Trek and that whole communicator thing reminded me of a flip phone. So I was loath to let go of my flip phone. But I was having my first son. My wife and I were having our first son, and I got an iPhone because I understood the camera was better on it.
Huh?
And I remember this feeling of look at these apps, and it was before apps were really that much of a thing, right? We were all getting educated on what apps were and how to use them and configure your life form. But I remember holding this phone and thinking it's really beautiful. It's kind of hypnotic. I know I'm not using it to its maximum capacity here, and I wonder if I'll ever be doing that, like this powerful tool that's in my hand. I didn't feel fear, but I felt a kind of a personal lack of knowledge on how to max out with that. And it's interesting, right? Super powerful world-changing technology. We didn't really ever hear people say, "I'm afraid of this phone," and maybe they should have been afraid of the phone, right? The
I
research
remember an
shows it.
era where I was told you will get brain cancer if you use a cell phone.
I remember that as well. I think I ignored that. I
I
think I was
come on,
ignorant.
true. Like I really did.
but nobody ever said the phone was coming for your job. But is it similar? Like there's this very powerful, useful technology that we get to access and orient towards solving the problems that we need to solve, whether it's personal or professional every day. I know you've said before, there's a good way to use AI, and then there's kind of a not so good way to use like I don't know what's a bad way to use AI. Like, let's talk about AI in the context of education. Everybody's got a perspective on it.
Yeah. I do want to back up for 1 second. What did you say before that? It was kind of posing a question and I wanted to respond to it. And it was along the lines of the cell phone and no one.
Yeah, we nobody really ever thought the phone was coming for their job, so they weren't really afraid of the phone, but it was arguably a world-changing technology in your life.
Yeah, okay. So I really love the Burning Glass Institute's reports they put out recently. And they put one out recently. I believe it was Beyond the Binary, I think is the one. I've read several. But what they're talking about is what we're seeing is there's the fear of the job replacement. And we're not really for sure seeing that yet. With the early indications are it's kind of ambiguous. We don't know. But what we are seeing are skills are changing. And so what might have been more mundane job tasks individuals were doing, they now need higher level critical thinking job tasks. And way back many years ago, I was implementing lean at an institution where the fear was a good process will replace my job. And I kept saying, no, good process is going to make your job better because no longer are you doing the mundane. You're now getting to spend your time thinking and having and creating real impact. And so maybe this actually ties into the good and bad ways of using AI. And so one of the, I'm going to call it safer ways to use AI is actually when you think about process efficiency. What are those mundane things that we know AI does well, that the AI can take over, so then it allows the human beings to focus on more critical decision making, more interacting with other individuals, providing more effective services to individuals. So that's a good use of AI. One area that is really up for a lot of discussion and concern right now, especially in the education setting, when we're talking with not just higher education, but also K-12 education, elementary and secondary, is what is an appropriate amount of AI to even have interacting with an individual at certain developmental phases in their lives. So we can measure the effects of learning. We can know if AI is actually helping or not helping. And we hear a lot of anecdotes right now about I was able to create these custom chats or chat bots, agents that were able to work with my learners based on their individual learning needs and cater to the learning. So we've heard some of the anecdotal that there are things that work well. But then there's also the effects of AI. What are the long-term effects of individuals who may do more significant interaction with AI than other human beings at these developmental phases in their life. That's harder to measure, and that takes a lot longer to measure. And AI is so new. There's so much we don't know. And even the measurements of learning is also very longitudinal. And so we have early information that's coming, but we don't know. And so when educators are concerned, they're rightly concerned, because our purpose in education is to do good. And we don't know the effects of AI, and we want to be really intentional and thoughtful in making sure that we aren't creating unintended consequences.
Right. Right. Like, I mean, I know uh, the screens during COVID had an effect that I don't think any of us realized they were going to have.
Right.
Right.
Yeah,
My,
like the language barrier for kids who weren't able to read facial expression. And so we see that playing out in the generation today that is now hitting college, and their ways of interacting with others is different. Not bad. I'm not going to say bad. It's different than what we're used to. So maybe it's better. I don't know. But those are things we have to contend with. And we know that a very quick 5-6 years after COVID, we've already started to see those effects. How quickly will we see the effects of AI? Are they visible or are they invisible that take longer to manifest?
if I had to guess, I would say invisible. No, I think about it myself. Am I leaning on this thing too much? Is my critical thinking getting flabby? I come from a background of strategic briefing. That's always been my job, right? Is I'll figure out what the mandatories are, figure out what the background is, figure out what people need to know, and then start creating some guidelines around it. And so I feel like I was very fortunate with AI coming on that I had this orientation, because it feels a lot like what you describe as world readiness skills. It's you develop a view, you figure out what's going on as far as the context goes, you provide the context, you provide what it is that you want to create, and you say, but don't go over here, keep it kind of in this lane, and be wary of this, and this part over here I don't even know about this. So you think about that, and come back with a few different things, and then you iterate on that, right? So I mean, that I feel like I'm not getting out of shape. My brain isn't getting out of shape, but that's me. And I come from a background that I feel like it's advantageous for interacting with this powerful technology. Now, as you think about creating world readiness at scale, right? Because you've got a really interesting project going. It's the Workforce Futures Accelerator, right? Is that what it's
Yeah.
called?
With the Association of Community College Trustees, yes.
So you're embedding experiential learning, world readiness into short-term community college programs, skills first training, uh, and I assume AI plays a big role in all of this. Can you kind of walk us through, like, that feels like a great analogy for everything that we're talking about. Can you walk us through how that, like, how you designed that, how you and Riipen and your colleagues at Riipen worked on that, and kind of what you're learning from that about the workforce and individual?
Yeah. What that really came from was actually discussions with the Association of Community College Trustees. And then also, we brought in Worcester Polytechnic Institute Center for Project-Based Learning. Because for me, just kind of for 1 second talking about work-based learning, it's really important to build the infrastructure to do that well. Again, there's a lot of chaos, there's a lot of noise. Having, as an institution, your eye on that end goal, and then being able to figure out what are the things we need to put into place to reach that end goal. And for me, in the service of students, to really truly create programs that serve them, serve the diverse learners, give them lots of different opportunities to be able to learn those skills, to apply and master those skills, you have to build that culture and that infrastructure on your campus first and foremost. That we believe in this, we know this brings a value to our students, and we're investing resources in it. And so that's really where a lot of this discussion came about, and why it's so important to me that the Center for Project-Based Learning is doing that faculty development piece and the Teaching and Learning Center development piece, because it's really, really important that we support our institutions in building the infrastructure to do that well. And community colleges are oftentimes the most resource constrained of our higher education institutions while also serving the most underserved students in education. And so anytime for me, I feel it's a personal responsibility that anytime I develop any programs working with community colleges, I'm thinking about how do we get to their systemic barriers to being able to do the work well. We talk about students having barriers. Institutions have barriers too, and resources are a barrier. And so, how do we make sure we bring that on board? One thing I do want to hit on is when AI first came out, and there was a lot of concern about cheating, students aren't what you were talking about. Are we getting kind of flabby with our critical thinking skills? One of the things we actually had a lot of rigorous discussion around is work based learning is kind of a solve for that. Because in our model, students are working in teams. AI does not fix team dynamics. It doesn't fix intergroup conflict. And those are really, really important world readiness skills. Those are human skills we all need. And so the project is actually allowing individuals to develop more of those world readiness skills, even if the project is using AI or implementing AI or thinking about AI in some way. And so that's kind of that important interconnected piece. Like AI can do mundane pretty nicely. I really don't trust it most of the time. So that's how I don't get flabby is I check everything and I fix most of what AI puts out. But AI can also be that tool that you're using in which as a team you're thinking through, is this working? Is this right? Is this what we want to do? No. And so it still even gives opportunities to be able to build those skills even further. And so that was what was really important with our Futures Accelerator with the Association of Community College Trustees is one, making sure that all learners have access to the same level of opportunity. We know from the data that students who have access to work-based learning generally will have better workforce outcomes. And we know that community college students are less likely to have access to work-based learning. So it was really important for us to think about how do we start to truly globalize work-based learning? And then how do we do it in a way that our learners are able to take advantage of? Because a lot of times we create programs and then complain later that no one did it. Well, you didn't develop it with the right people in mind because you didn't have the right people at the table. And then you didn't communicate to those people because you don't know how to communicate to those people. And so thinking very intentionally about how do we make sure we reach the right populations in the way that they can take advantage of it with all the rest of their busy lives going on. And so I'll kind of pause there because I've said a lot and I think I've probably moved from your question. But that's really how I think about how we really bring about innovation and work-based learning is how do we support our institutions? Because this is new. It's different. We're bridging all of these gaps because you were talking about economic development and workforce development, workforce development, education,
Yeah.
commerce, labor, and all of those are their own individual silos. None of this was created by any one. These were the silos that were created by all together. And so how do we really start to think through all of those silos and how do we really start to get at what is the goal we're all achieving for in all this chaos and all this silo and how do we reach that goal?
And that, I mean, it really sounds like the world readiness orientation across stakeholders is what works to create. It's not like if you're the wise person on the hill and you figure you know best, um, it doesn't sound like it's conducive to this, very fertile soil where we grow these world readiness skills, right? I want to back up for a second. What are the world readiness skills? I want to ask you that, and I also want to say one thing first. Uh, my children grew up in an expeditionary learning environment, which I always thought was very cool. And I've heard some of the skills people talk about, whether they say durable skills or soft skills or world readiness skills. I know those aren't the same things. Even oh, Daniela Amade was talking about how important the humanities were because of the skills that are imparted by the humanities. So what are the world readiness skills and are they the same? Are they different? Are they like tell me a little bit about that.
So, this is probably going to be like the biggest buzzkill in the world. They're the same. Here's how I figured that out.
Yeah.
So, I was actually working for the state agency in Missouri, and St. Louis puts out a state of the employers kind of report every year where they ask different questions. Some of those around what are the skills that the individuals you're hiring are lacking? What are the skills that you are most in need of? And I remember reading this report and seeing on there critical thinking, communication, problem solving. I'm like, wait a second. I went to college. Wait a second. I hear these talked about as general education values. And if you were to look through randomly select any number of institutions and look through their catalogs to figure out what are those general education values, almost universally, communication, critical thinking, problem solving. And so that was the moment where I'm like, well, wait a second. The very thing employers say they need most in individuals is the very same thing education says is what makes it bigger than job training, because they are imbuing these life skills among students. That was a moment where I realized we're all talking past each other and we're all really talking about the same skills. And so whenever you think about, no matter the context, if it's with a partner, if it's what I'm trying to build on my children, if it's the colleagues I want to work with, if it's the leader I want to work for, what are those things I want to see those individuals have? Usually you're going to describe the same types of skills. Like, I want someone who can problem solve, who can critically think. And so they are the same. The problem is when we communicate it in the silos that we know. And so durable skills is a very much workforce. And even if you were to say to another human being, oh, you need durable skills, that's not really going to resonate with me. Even soft skills, I'm like, what even is that? But whenever you start talking about human skills, like, well, human skills, humaning. Okay, I can get that. And so those are the basics.
Yeah.
But what I'm seeing now really plays on those as we talk about things like EQ, RQ, HQ, leadership. All of those are really taking those fundamentals and their additional skills that are building from our ability to do those fundamentals well.
And that's what the dimension of the system where you guys operate in work-based, project-based learning, that's how you impart those skills. And I know you talk about adaptability being kind of your word of every day, right?
Right.
Is that one of those skills, or is that just a powerful byproduct of those skills working together?
It has to be a powerful byproduct, because when you think about what it means to adapt, adapting is responding. And so if you're going to get past adapting and just responding to the world around you, then what you're really thinking of, and what I kind of call it, is thriving. If I'm in a world where I can thrive in ambiguity, I adapt when I need to, I innovate, I create, I architect when I need to. I think we're all in a world today where enough gets thrown at us daily that we are adapting, even when we're taking time to architect, and we might not be architecting as much as we want to, because we're focusing on that adapting. Like, I did a leadership training thing several years ago where it talked about we all spend time fighting our fires and we don't spend time doing the strategic, which is the architecting. And we end up putting our focus more on that reactive, when as leaders, we need to focus on that more strategic, the architecting, and we also need to empower our teams to do that as well. And you see all the time where employers, they give out awards for, best firefighter or best person who solved this crisis, or wow, they really came through and took this and made it something. And I'm like, in an ideal world, those crises never happen, because you're thinking of how to prevent them before they ever occur. And so that's part of that. Let's get out of that reactive mode and more into that proactive mode. And that happens. I think it's just we have to create an environment in which people know they can do it and it's okay for them to do it. Because you don't ever get awards for you prevented the thing from ever happening in the first place, so we never even thought about it.
Well, so that's, we were going back to where we started here, the kind of the fear that's running rampant in so many vectors of the workforce. Right. And you and I spoke, and, the amygdala getting triggered and the effects that has on a human being, like there's a, fight or flight, your facility with, Claude is not something that's being accessed during fight or flight. So in order to be truly adaptable, right, there's a way that you have to meet the world, that you have to be ready for the world. So like in working with these community college students, like what are you seeing as far as how world readiness becomes something that they carry around with themselves, that they can be adaptable?
Yeah.
And that.
So I'll add there's fight, flight, or freeze.
Oh, yeah.
Get stuck. Yeah.
Yeah.
So actually at Riipen, this is something that we've seen a lot, thought a lot about. And actually, because we've seen it's so important that how many of us went into a job and 3 months into the job were experts? Like the classic internship model. I did one internship over the summer. Now I'm an expert and I'm ready to go. Like that doesn't happen. Let's be real. At least not in my world. And so what we've actually really, really started to see is that need for that growth over time and the development to be able to learn from your successes and failures to gain the confidence to do that. And so we've actually kind of reworked quite a bit of our model to really focus on not just that internship, which I would say is probably the point where you're supposed to have some mastery of skill. That's the expectation of employers. And if you don't, it becomes potentially a bad experience. But how through an entire student journey are we introducing, reinforcing, and mastering these skills? So by the time you hit the internship, you are more ready. And how do we de-risk it up front? So that way you feel more confident as you go through and you're more ready for those employer interactions when they happen. The way you really, it's like anything, you have to practice it, you have to work at it, and you build from your learnings. And so the first time I do anything, I'm scared, I'm not very good at it. But if we teach learners that persistence really is what you need to do, then we build that into the student journey, the learner journey, curricular and co-curricular. They start to build that confidence where it's no longer fearful, scary, or unknown. We know right now of AI, fearful, scary, unknown. If you demystify that early on for the student experience, but then also teach them you can solve problems, you can work in a team, you're actually a great leader and facilitator, then they learn, yes, I can do that, but then they build on those successes in ways that we can't even think of, because then in your mind, I'm a problem solver, I'm a leader, and then you just run with that and you can build mountains from that. I mean, we can't define up front what that potential is. And that's what education is. It creates that potential.
Wow. So you see this when you embed work-based learning, project-based learning into these shorter term programs, um, is it is it is the delta, the impact, is that created within the first work-based learning project that these students participate in, or is there a certain number of reps before you start seeing the impact? Like how quickly does that take hold?
It actually varies, and there's a lot that we don't know yet. Like there are different partners I'm working with that are testing that very thing. It's dosage and intensity, and it'll vary depending on the student population, the program, how complex it is, the short term, long term, like it's going to vary. But what you can do is define for in these types of, and you can bucket in these types of short term programs, we want to do XYZ. And this associate degree, we want to do XYZ. In this associate degree in something very technical, we want to do this. And so you can kind of start to bucket out. It really isn't known for sure, though. And part of that is we know it's kind of hard to measure learning because it can be squishy. This is learning. This is the same thing. It's skill development. And we can measure skill development as in like the actual skill and how you do it. But there's so much to that that's so uniquely human. We're never going to be able to quantify that with numbers.
Right. But there is even if you don't quantify it with numbers, I I know you've said that the world readiness skills are, beyond simply being powerful and impactful. There's also an access issue going on here, which is implied by the community college program, right? So like what I hear when you're describing this is, look, if you've been given the opportunity to, you can do whatever you want to do, and you can like try this out, try that out, and we have faith in you. And we know that there's a socioeconomic strata where young people are given that type of reinforcement, and then there's socioeconomic strata where young people don't have access to that type of reinforcement. And so I would imagine that this project-based learning experience becomes very special and impactful, when you haven't had access to that, right? So that there's the fight, flight, or freeze, or give up dimension, or the gee, I can do this, like because on the one hand, maybe some privileged people say, yeah, I've always been told I can do this, kind of like that intern syndrome. I know everything now and I can, like I'll run this company right now. Do you see that type of a difference? I don't even know how you would measure that. It's like do or do not. It's a very Yoda sort of a thing, isn't it?
And it is so hard to measure because when we're talking about those type of differences. I'll get very honest for a second. I did not grow up in an environment of privilege. The first time I even heard the words social and capital used together in one sentence, I was in my late 30s at a doctoral program where I was studying for my doc. I had no idea that was even a concept before then. And so it was never something I'd ever implemented or even thought of. What is social capital? And I remember once I actually learned what social capital was, and that's the ability to really be able to make your own network of supporters, your community of individuals who are there for you. I was able to reflect back on times in my life where people saw something in me and believed in me in ways that I didn't, and kind of helped push me to the next thing in my life. But it was never intentional or thought out. And I thought, if that was something I knew about in my teens, where would my life be today? And how many individuals out there would be somewhere different in their future if they know about this now? And so that's what I kind of liken it to, is that untapped potential, that we don't know, we have no idea. And work-based learning contributes to that. When it's done with employers authentically, it's helping students develop those networks, those connections. But students have to know. You can't take it for granted that every student knows the same things you know. And so when we build programs, that's why it's really, really critical and important. You bring the voice of the individuals you're serving so you know their perspective. I also attended college initially as a non-traditional student. And my college experience was all the offices were closed at the time I was on campus because I was going in the evening and everyone closes at 5 p.m. I remember being told, it was assumed by our administrators, well, you're full-time working, you don't need campus services, so we're not going to be open for you. No one ever asked. And so just even thinking that way about what is it we don't know because we're not having the conversations with the right people. What is work-based learning capable of if we really create systems of access for everyone? How do you even do that? We need to talk to people to figure out how to even do that, which I firmly believe our model does help support that. But then what are all of those missing opportunities that we're not even thinking of yet, that we need to learn from our learners to be able to build in?
You don't disappoint, Mara. I'll tell you one thing I've always believed about this capacity for wisdom. Like it's a very aspirational term, but the sign of the wise woman or the wise man is always somebody who knows how much they don't know. Like that's the if there is any uh, symbol in my mind that says that this person has stuff that you need to hear, it's the person who knows how much they don't know. I Hey, in that vein, if you could tell employers to change just one thing about how they think about job readiness, what would it be and what would it unlock?
So one thing, recognizing that there's so little I actually know, when I lean in as a leader, it's never because I think I know answers. It's because I know how to get smart people to give the great answers. And one thing that I see over and over again, and we do this in interviews, we do this in how we talk to each other, is we expect the leader to be the one to know everything. And if a leader says, oh, let me check with my team, someone replies, oh, wait, you don't know that? And so it's like, what really needs to happen is we really need to empower the true experts, who are the people who are doing the job every day. We need to empower them to be the experts, but we need to empower leaders to be able to say, my job is to allow the experts to be experts. It is not to take their expertise. It is not to speak and pretend I have their expertise. And it's not to sit here at a table and pretend I know what the heck I'm talking about because you seem to think I should. We need to empower leaders to truly be leaders, and we need to empower experts to truly be experts, and we need to not conflate the two. That's what I think world readiness really is all about, is knowing where I am able to provide in the world, knowing I'm looking for that far off, deep North Star. I'm navigating this chaos to get there, and I don't have to know it all by myself. We make our leaders believe that they should know it all, and they should be able to solve it all by themselves. And it happens in a little silo in their little leader bubble. And that truly is a crutch for employers, for employees, for everybody. And we see this play out in our personal lives too. When I think I'm all alone, I'm on the island trying to solve it. I can't ask for help. How does that outcome actually look for us? We just need to be a lot better about accepting the reality of what it means to be human and how flawed that is. And it's okay.
And we'll drop the mic on that one. Thank you, Mara. Thanks for joining us today. What
Yeah,
fun.
thank you, Jeff. This was great. I'm really glad we had a chance to discuss and talk.
As am I. I look forward to talking more in the future.
Absolutely. We'll see each other many times, I am sure.
Thank you.